It is so cool to talk to you. I want to start by asking, what was your introduction to this project, and what were you thinking when you first got involved?
I mean, my introduction, I think, happened before I even got cast, honestly. I think it was a long time coming in a way. I think I'd prepared myself from a very young age to do a Western. I kind of used to literally, I grew up in North Yorkshire in England for a while, and my days were spent very much kind of riding my bike in the summer days, pretending it was a horse with a stick that I pretended was a gun. Kind of a very cliche, imaginative childhood. And they were like some of the best days of my life. I remember them fondly. And so when this came across, I remember it was in my email inbox, as all the auditions come through. And I remember feeling a sense of kind of a little bit of fate. I'm not too much of a believer in fate. I think you make your own, but there was a feeling that this had been a long time coming. And then when I read the script, even more so, because Michael's writing just made sense to me. I felt like I knew this character. And weirdly, even though I'd grown up on Westerns and watched a lot of John Wayne movies growing up, and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was like one of my favorites, I had never read much about Billy. I knew who he was. I'd seen the kind of iconic picture, but really hadn't done a deep dive into him as I had with other people like Jesse James and things. And so reading the script that Michael wrote, I was kind of blown away by the eccentricities of him and his intricacies and the parts of him that I didn't expect from a gunslinging, badass kind of cowboy. And so, yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I was like thrilled to even get the chance to try and play this guy who was like my childhood kind of dream. And then once I did, I got hooked really, really quickly and kind of just started doing a deep dive. Before I even got the role, I was deep diving into the books and into the legends, and there's lots of conflicting information. So you kind of have to sift through and mine, which I think the script does really well. It kind of, sifting through and kind of trying to tell a story that for the most part is factual, but then filling in the gaps of the things that we just don't know. So yeah, but mostly to answer your question, it was just like childlike thrill at being able to play a cowboy.
Well, I mean, yeah, like the idea of being in a Western, I mean, it's always been one of the coolest ideas out there. Like every kid growing up wants to be in a Western at some point in their life.
Yeah.
How did you envision his relationships? Because he's got some very deep relationships, and we certainly see as a kid, we see a lot of those, but you can still see how they're shaping him when he's older as you get into the role, basically. How did you picture them when you were taking on the role?
I mean, I think relationships are the backbone of any character. That we're yes, there's nature versus nurture and everything in psychology, but I think really you're born with certain aspects of your personality, but I think most of it is crafted through interactions with people as we grow up. And so the first season of this show is very much about, who made Billy who he is. And that, that's his mum, it's his stepdad, Antrim, it's Alias, the random guy who he bumped into at one point and spent a few weeks with and then never saw again. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen it. It's Jesse, it's all these characters, it's all the people we haven't met yet that will come into season 2, knock on wood. Relationships are absolutely integral to making Billy into Billy. And I think what a lot of the previous kind of adaptations of his life haven't done so much is delve into those relationships in a deep way. Usually in the movies, you jump into the action kind of straight away. And Billy is already this kind of like psychopathic killer. But in ours, we allow the audience to kind of sit with the family and see how he shapes his mentality and his mindset. And he's incredibly watchful. The character and the real person, by all accounts, was hugely influenced by the people he came across. And he was incredibly intelligent. And so he absorbed a lot of information. He was a quick learner. And so people had a real effect on him. So yeah, I mean, again, that's a long-winded way of saying, I think the relationships is what makes the man,
And at the same time, it feels a lot like I mean, we get introduced to a Billy or William or well, whatever name you want to give him.
So many names. You have to just pick one.
Well, he's so sweet as a kid, but you can see him kind of ground down as you get deeper in. At the same time, kind of the loss of his relationships feels like what's hardening him. When we get him around the middle of this season, I mean, do you think he has a lot of hope left? Where we're getting kind of halfway through the story, or how would you describe him at that point?
I think by the midpoint of the season one, I think he always has hope. I think he's a hopeful person. I do think he has seen enough crap by that point that he's changed deeply inside. I think he's no longer the kind of hopeful young, Irish immigrant kid who like longs for the better life. I think he's chased that better life with his family and realized that actually a lot of it is a lie, that the great kind of dream of moving out west and pitching a stake in the ground and having your like bit of paradise was a lie. It was something that was told to people to go and kind of, for lack of a better word, colonize that area and start a new life. And he sees that for what it is. He's not someone who buys into the BS, the lie of the thing. He sees it for what it is, but that doesn't mean he's going to give up. He's not someone who gives up. He's someone who always fights. And I think to fight, you have to have hope, right? Like no one puts up a fight against things they don't like unless they have some hope. Otherwise, you just give up. So to answer your question, I think he's hopeful, but I definitely think he's more cynical by the middle of the season. And I think as we go on and we go into a season 2 and we get to see the Lincoln County War unfold, I think that cynicism is going to start to grow in him, and he's going to start to become a little bit more ruthless and kind of absorb some of those traits from the people he's seen and realize that, like, his mum's kind of wishful thinking isn't all that he needs to get by. He needs to step up and kind of get strong as well.
Well, and his idea of justice seems to evolve too throughout what we see in this season, because like I love how he's, as a kid, he steals the pen from the banker, and then you see him slowly kind of have to do what he has to do, I guess. But justice seems to be a big motivation too, I guess. Honor and justice. Would you say that's kind of accurate, or how would you describe that side of him?
Oh, I'd say that's a huge theme in the show and to his life and his character. I think he has a bit of a kind of perhaps naive view on justice and honor at the beginning, which, to all credit to his mum, was kind of endowed on him with all the best interests and all the kind of, the hopeful wishes of his Irish Catholic mother, who wanted him to live a good life and end up in heaven. But life has other plans for him, and that's he has too many obstacles to just be this kind of pure little Billy boy. He has to become a bit of a ruthless man. And yeah, honor, I think, changes in his mind. I think he's always loyal. That's a huge part of who he is. Loyalty is massive to him. And until someone proves him otherwise, he'll be loyal to them. And, we start to see him kind of questioning Jesse as the show goes on. And at the beginning, Jesse kind of wins him over pretty quickly and kind of teaches him a lot of these skills that he then leans on to survive. But Jesse quickly starts to lose his trust. And although, he's still with him at this point in the season, he is starting to, you can see those moments where he distrusts him a little bit. And then as that goes on and he meets new people, he kind of starts to lead with that distrust. And so, yeah, loyalty is huge, and justice becomes something that I think he realizes that he has to be in charge of sometimes, because it doesn't always come in the way that he thinks it should.
Well, in terms of preparing for this role, what was it like learning the gunslinging moves? Because seeing you kind of the practicing in the mirror thing, I mean, that was such a great scene. How long and how much work did that take to get to?
Luckily, I had 2 weeks of quarantine because it was in the height of COVID when I first got to Canada to film. And so I was locked down for 2 weeks. And I also had wisdom tooth surgery the first week. And so I was like out of action completely. I couldn't do anything except play Red Dead Redemption and watch Westerns and spin my gun. And so production, kindly dropped off a safe practice gun that was kind of the same weight, didn't fire anything or anything like that. But I was able to then just literally spend hours and hours and hours on a daily basis for almost 2 whole weeks just practicing. And by the end of the 2 weeks, I was getting pretty good, and I had a little bit of help from my stunt double, Danny, who's an amazing literal gunslinger. He does it professionally, and he was able to kind of get on Zoom with me, and he'd coach me through tricks, and we'd practice together, and he'd show me something and I'd try and emulate it, and I'd get it wrong and I'd beat myself up. And then for the next 2 days, I'd like anxiously and aggressively practice it. And then I'd get on Zoom and I'd show him and he'd be really proud. So it was, I loved it. And by the end, I still have a practice one here that most days I'll use it as almost like a fidget spinner type thing. When I'm anxious or I'm thinking about something, I find myself picking it up and spinning it around my apartment. So it became like a stress ball in a way, which is great because that's, then you're not thinking about it and it becomes second nature. So that scene you're referring to, we started calling the taxi driver scene, because, it's like, you talking to me, that kind of thing. And that inspired me, because I was like, well, if we're comparing it with like one of the most iconic scenes in movies, it's got to be pretty good. So that was a good motivator to get skilled at it.
Well, I'm assuming most of that was you, because there's so much of it that you're in frame. You can tell it's you doing it. So I assume that was all or mostly you.
I think for the most part, I think there was one shot in that sequence that we cut away to Danny because he could do a sideways spin that at that point I couldn't do. But of course, by the end of the shooting, I could pretty much do everything he could do. A little slower, but I was annoyed because I was like, can we go back and can we refilm that scene from the first week of filming, and can I do it myself so that it can be all me? But no, it was like 90% me, and he jumped in for I think one shot where he's doing this incredible sideways spin.
That's cool.
Yeah. I was very lucky in that I got to do pretty much 99% of my own stunts on the shot. Even the writing and everything, which is always a blessing because it just kind of gives you a little more feeling of authenticity.
Well, the last thing I'd like to know is, did you have any Westerns that kind of influenced you or kind of played a part in even preparing for this role or anything?
I mean, like I said, growing up, I used to watch Westerns with my mom a lot, and we were kind of Western fans. I remember like Sunday afternoons, we'd sit and watch a Western as we ate our Sunday dinner and stuff, sometimes if we were allowed to have a TV dinner that week. And we'd watch like John Wayne movies that were just on terrestrial television in the UK. I don't remember any of the names, but then when I was a little older, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid became like my number one favorite. I mean, Paul Newman in that, it's just like, he's got a bit of a Billy quality to him. He's kind of very charming and watchful. And I mean, both of them actually are fantastic. But yeah, I think Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was the one for me, because that kind of bromance aspect and the kind of, it's almost like a road trip movie, It's like the first road trip movie. And it's a comedy as much as it is a thrilling Western action movie as well. So it's got a bit of everything. Yeah.
I have to say, I'm a big fan of Young Guns too, because it came out when I was a teenager.
Okay.
So for me, like the vision of this character I sometimes have is that, but
yeah, of course.
Such a different character from what you guys have fleshed out here.
Yeah, I have avoided watching any of the other versions of Billy the Kid, because when you're doing something that's been done before, or been portrayed by someone before, you don't want to copy, and sometimes you can't help it. If you watch it, you're gonna absorb some of those qualities that you like that they're playing. But then I met Emilio a few months after we finished. I think it was like this February. We met at an event in LA, and he came over, and I didn't even realize he was in the corner, and I felt someone watching me, and I felt a tap on my back, and I turn around and it's Emilio Estevez stood there, and I just was like, what? My jaw dropped. And he introduced himself by saying, William Bonney. And I was like, no, my name's, oh, I see what you mean. And kind of, had a moment of kind of total awe, and had to confess to him that I hadn't actually seen Young Guns because I didn't want to spoil my own performance, but that I'd seen clips of it, and I've seen, lots of chunks of it in my, over the years, because it's so iconic. And I do think, from what I can tell, it's two very different versions of the story. I can't wait to watch his, because from what I've seen, it looks incredible. And I think they may even be doing a Young Guns 3 at some point, from what I've heard.
Cool. That would be great too.
Yeah.
Well,
so lots of Billy the Kid content out there at the moment.
Right? I mean, it is such a fascinating story. And I mean, even for the era, it fascinated people his story fascinated people for centuries, like, well, not centuries, but decades now.
Almost 2 centuries.
Yeah.
Yeah. Century and a half. Yeah. I think he's an everyman, I think he's someone who, yeah, he's this kind of outlaw villain, but he's incredibly empathetic and someone who you can see a lot of yourself in, because he's a reader, he's a writer, he's a lover, and he's a mommy's boy, and he's a killer at the same time. So there's all these aspects to him that are just so endearing, but also shocking at the same time. So I think he's kind of a great character study. I think that's why we keep coming back to him.
And the idea that maybe he died at 21 or maybe he lived on. I mean, it's almost like Elvis.
I know. I won't wade into that debate, because I don't know where Michael Hurst is planning on taking our show. Though I do personally, from what I've discovered and who I've spoken to down in New Mexico in the local area, I believe he died there and I believe he's buried there. But there's a lot of conflicting kind of schools of thought on that. So hopefully one day we find out, but we may never.
The fiction is always going to be greater than the reality, probably.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for the time. It was awesome chatting. It's a great show, and it's awesome seeing your portrayal, because he's so intense.
He is. He's intense. He's a lot of things, but he is intense. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. I hope I get to talk to you for season 2.
Likewise. Me too. Thank you, Andrew.